Hey, what's going on? It's Ty.
Hadouken!
I am super stoked for Outriders, especially after its most recent demo. But that doesn't mean I don't have a few ideas for how to make it even better as we lead up to launch. However, before we get into that, if you like the idea of videos like this and other discussions on gaming language and also how to get into different genres, make sure to hit the subscribe button down below. With that out of the way, let's head down the warp pipe. So, as I mentioned before, I am really excited for Outriders. So if you haven't checked it out, the demo's out now. Go download it on your platform of choice. For me, I was playing it on the PS5 with a few friends, but like I said, there's a few things I'd like to improve upon. The first thing that really struck out to me with it was the shaky cam during cinematics. Shaky cam, as you know, can be used to really emphasize kind of action or excitement, but Outriders seems to use it as like its default camera for cinematics, which basically makes it look like you're watching one of the older Bourne movies back in the day all the time, even when it's just for conversations. Like for action scenes, I can totally see it, and it completely gives you that foot on the ground kind of battlefield view, and it definitely works really well in some of the cinematics. But for the ones where you're mostly just talking to characters, it feels really out of place to me. So I would prefer they switch it up with a more stable camera, just to get a better kind of view of everything going on. My next little gripe is with the map, and more specifically the mini-map, as we haven't seen the full map of the game here, and the map menu is maybe a little busy for my liking, but it definitely does the trick and is probably going to get expanded on significantly as we get into the full game. But the mini-map is where I'd really like to see some improvement done. It has this empty kind of void look to it because there's no detail for the terrain. So while it's great that it gives you enemy positions, ally positions, quest markers, and all the usual kind of stuff, it kind of fits into that same issue I have with Neo 2's minimap, where it doesn't really tell you where to go or where to follow to get to a specific quest marker or even enemy. And I mean, at least this is being more honest. Neo 2 kind of tricks you a little bit, but with Outriders, it's just kind of blank, and it left me wanting something more. I feel like a minimap, I should be able to look at it, and as long as I'm not getting shot at, be able to navigate to whatever icon I can see on it without looking at the main screen. Obviously, no one's going to do that, but I think that's the mandate that all minimaps should abide by. The next area of improvement, I would say, is the responsiveness during some of the menu interactions. It's not really that bad, but when you're in the inventory system and you're looking to get an item junked or really just highlighted for junking, the click down of the thumbstick I noticed can be kind of unresponsive, and I had to actually click it a few times or mouse over something and wait for a moment and then click down. I know it's not a mouse because I'm on a PlayStation controller here, but let's all be honest, that menu icon, that's a mouse. They've just remapped it to the left stick. So we're finally at the big guns of my argument here, and that's for some of the gameplay, or more specifically the gun handling of the game. When you're aiming down the sights, it actually reduces the bullet spread of the guns. Personally, I prefer it when games actually have the same bullet spread regardless of aiming down the sights or doing some hip fire. For me, it really allows me to use the aim down the sights to track better versus the mobility that you get when you're hip firing. So I even actually did some testing with standing still and firing from the hip and then firing while aiming down the sights, and I noticed that the spread actually changes, which is a little disappointing to me, as I always prefer the idea of the gun handling the way the gun handles, and if I'm moving, I can move faster, so the spread being a little bit wider while I'm moving completely makes sense. But it being arbitrarily widened while you're on hip fire really bothers me personally. The other small thing I'd like to have changed is the targeting reticle when you're doing hip fire. It's just a tiny little dot on the screen, and that can be totally fine, but for me, playing on a 65-inch TV, I'd actually rather it be either gone or something a little more noticeable. So for me, I've been playing a lot of Resident Evil 5 and 6 now. I know I've put myself through some torture up to the lead up of Resident Evil 8, but the real thing I liked about specifically Resident Evil 5, and you can enable it in Resident Evil 6, is the fact that there's no cursor or dot for the aiming while you're on hipfire, and when you aim down the sights, it pulls up the red dot. I know that's not going to be the way that most games are going to handle it, because it's a little bit of a weird system if you're not used to it. However, the idea of doing away with any targeting reticle, I know where the middle of my screen is generally. I've played enough shooters, and I've spent many hours doing hipfire, so I don't need a targeting reticle, but if there's going to be one, I would just like it to be more pronounced and more obvious, because sometimes it just looks like it's a piece of some dust or a little particle floating through, and it can kind of get lost in the graphics. That leads me to my last kind of point here. It's not really something that is going to ruin the experience by any stretch, but the graphics actually feel a little dated compared to some of the newer stuff that's come out, specifically on next-gen consoles, or even later last-gen releases like Ghost of Tsushima or Last of Us Part 2. I get it. I completely understand. This isn't the same game, it's a looter shooter. I would actually probably like to compare it more to Destiny, and it looks and feels just a little bit older than Destiny does because of a few small touches. So the biggest thing to me is that the graphics kind of feel like almost Gears of War-ish. I know it's Unreal Engine, which makes everything automatically feel like Gears of War, but it has a very similar feel to the aesthetic. I'm not complaining about that. I love the Gears games, but it would be nice if it had a little bit of the more modern Gears 5 touch, which looks really good and looks next gen if you're playing on the Series X. The other small little thing that kind of bothers me is that the physics of the clothing are basically non-existent. If you have a long coat on, it doesn't flow or anything like that. When smaller indie titles like Remnant from the Ashes can actually build that in and have physics on your long coat, it really is kind of disheartening that a game like this that supposedly would be a big budget game being published by Square Enix, it really would be nice to have those little touches, especially if you're playing on the next-gen consoles or a high-end gaming PC. So it would be really nice to have these small little additions or upgrades to the game when it comes out. I'm not expecting it to. Most likely they're just finishing up the polishing on the game. One little side note I would love is if the cover system would take a page from Division 2's cover system, which is very similar but just feels a little bit better. You could round the corners automatically by just holding the direction rather than needing to hold the direction and push a button. But that's from me spending 100 plus hours in Division 2 and having that stuff mapped to my brain. It's not that the cover system's bad by any stretch, just small little tweaks that would make it feel a little more familiar and a little more comfortable for someone like myself. Really though, the big thing here is that the cover system really isn't mandatory. I'm playing the Technomancer, which is one of the few classes that can benefit from taking cover, whereas my buddies are all playing classes that, well, the other 3 available classes, actually I don't even remember all of them, but I know the Pyromancer is in there, and so they're in the fray, they're dashing forward, so cover really isn't their friend, whereas for me it's a huge benefit. But let me know what you would change down below for Outriders if you've checked out the demo, and if not, I highly recommend it. After playing the demo, I actually went and pre-ordered the game, which I would usually wait for reviews, but it's just really good and fitting a really specific niche that me and my buddies are really itching for. But with that said, we're going to wrap it up for this week, and I'll see you guys next Games Tuesday.